afternoon, Mr. Erik Solheim. It is a privilege and honor to have you with us today in BuzzOnEarth studio. We have been conversing on these issues for quite some time, and it is important that somebody with your experience and exposure, with a geopolitical background, and also the experience of being a United Nations diplomat, it would be very essential for us to reflect on some of the very huge concerns that are addressing the global markets today, especially when it concerns climate action and the initiatives that are taken globally by nations as well as businesses, and the overall flows and the trade, the economics, everything around it. So I'm very happy to have you with us today.
Very happy to speak to Namaste to all my Indian friends.
Okay, Namaste. All right, so we get started here. So just to get the first confusion off the window, there is a huge lobby out there that thinks that this whole sustainability dialogue and the agenda, it is somewhere serving the Western interest, and the economic priorities of developing nations are much different than that of developed nations, and putting that whole onus of sustainable development actually puts some kind of pressure on the economic growth of these countries, which is anyway lagging behind and requires much more impetus. And going a zero carbon economy, or trying to look at putting pressure on trying to equalize this whole burden of the global warming, I think there is some consensus on the fact that this is not fair, and the kind of equity that can be brought in by the world order, that is not currently happening. So I would love to hear from you. What are your views on that, and how can this imbalance, if at all you think exists, be corrected?
I think basically this perspective is crazy because, look, India is much more vulnerable to climate change than, say, the United States of America, because India is a tropical country which is already very hot. So it will be more impact, will be more immediate and tougher. And India is a poorer nation, and poorer people will suffer more from climate change than well-to-do, say Americans. So India should not do this for anyone else. India should act on climate for the interest of the 1.4 billion people of India. That's, of course, exactly why Prime Minister Modi is so much in the forefront of this change. But added, India should, as China, see acting on climate as an enormous opportunity for economic development or growth, because solar power, look, is not cheaper than fossil fuels everywhere in the world. If India changed from coal to solar, not only is good to Mother Earth, not only is good to the health of Indian people with less pollution, but it also saves money, which can be used for health and education and other better purposes in India. So it's a triple win: good for health, good for ecology, and good for economy, if we go into the enormous opportunities for green shifts in the world. And of course, India can capture markets. There's no brand of cars from India dominating the global markets at the moment. And everyone knows Toyota. No one in the world really knows Indian brands. They don't know Chinese brands either. But going into electric cars, electric scooters, that's an enormous opportunity for India and China to capture global markets.
That's phenomenal, because here there is a great opportunity for India, and very rightly put up. And India's solar prowess and the technology and innovations that are happening in this field can actually put India at the forefront. And I should not just talk about India, because I'm trying to use India as one of the developing and emerging economies of the world, and also would love to scope out some of these responses for other developing nations of the world. So when we talk about the technology transfer and the climate-friendly technologies that can be, deployed in developing countries, or that can be given more impetus, focus, and climate investments, to be precise, why do you think there is some kind of, delay in that, when we very clearly understand that there is very little window left? As per the latest report from UNEP, we know that we are not left with more than 8 years to manage the carbon imbalance that is currently there. So what kind of efforts and policies can be put in place? And is there a role that United Nations is playing or can play in this field, or there is another economic order that can try to make this kind of climate investment flows for technology transfer or for right kind of innovation setup happen?
The main reason why two developing nations are very successful and some others are not is exactly that these nations see an opportunity in the climate investment. I mean, China and India see an opportunity here. They're not waiting for any handouts from the United States and Europe, which in fact will not come. Development everywhere in the world was a domestic process. It didn't come from someone coming from outside to help them. Japan developed, then Korea, then China, then Vietnam, now India. They're developing because they trust their own resourcefulness and start investing. And that's how India can develop. I mean, there are enormous markets in renewable energies. And Prime Minister Modi understands this very well. That's why I'm launching one mission after the other. Green hydrogen mission for India, solar battery mission for India, solar panel mission for India, using the state as a vehicle to drive the market and thus create jobs and prosperity for 1.4 billion Indians, many of them young people, because they desire a job. Exactly the same when India move into electric mobility, huge opportunities to capture markets. In Tamil Nadu, there is a company called Ola. I think most Indians know Ola. It's the Uber of India. They have a beautiful factory in Tamil Nadu, 2,000 young Tamil girls and women working, producing electrical scooters for India. And the ambition is to do it for the world. And Ola has a beautiful slogan, which I really love, that says, Tesla for the West, Ola for the rest. Meaning that Ola can capture global markets by well-produced but cheaper scooters and cars than what the United States or Germany or Japan will be able to do.
Okay, that's very interesting. I really like that slogan.
Tesla. It's beautiful slogan, fantastic slogan.
Yeah. Okay, that's wonderful. And that also brings me to another question that is a little related here. Since we are at BuzzOnEarth, we are very much focused on developing a climate innovation ecosystem for the country. And we are working a lot with the young people, the students, as well as the young startups, and trying to bring in the collaborative advantage that the various pools of excellence can bring in. And these excellence pools would include the technology institutions, the management institutions, and the research institutions, investors, corporates, industrial bodies, and so on. So here, it is important for us to also understand the kind of gap that we see. When you mentioned the first line that you mentioned, I know that you were mentioning the opportunity that lies ahead in front of India. But if we look at the gap, if there is any in the space of innovation, what do you think is the reason for that? And what kind of initiatives will propel that kind of innovative spirit, especially when it comes to climate action?
Yeah, obviously this was right. If you go back to the last century, I mean, most innovations were made in America and Europe because these were the most developed nations at the time with most firepower to engage in innovation. But that's a time which is a long time back. Now China and India are dominating in new patents, new innovations. I mean, China has already passed the United States of America with a wide margin. There are many more patents made in China than in the US, and India will soon come there. Why? Well, there are 1 million young Indians joining the labor market every single month. All of them want a job. Many of them will work in small or medium-sized companies, which will drive innovation. And they are smart and hungry and really on the ball. So I'm not at all worried that India will not be a really powerhouse of innovation in the decades to come. By 2050, India will far have surpassed Europe or the United States when it comes to innovations and patents and new developments.
That's a very positive scenario, and I really do hope that this happens, because this is not only good.
Well, China is already there. China has already passed Europe and America, and frankly, the Indians are not more stupid than the Chinese. So if China can do it, of course, India can do it.
Indians are way smarter, so I wouldn't agree. So this is very much possible, and there is a clear window of opportunity over there, especially as I keep saying, even otherwise, that India or at least the East cannot afford to develop the way West has developed. Because if we did that, then there will be maybe 3 to 4 more Earths required to do that. Because the kind of resources and the time and the capital intensive way in which the West has developed, that is not possible anymore. So we cannot write the same script. We will have to write our own script of development. And that requires a lot of collaborative action. And for that collaboration to happen, there is also enormous exchange between developed and the developing nations that is required. So since you have been a global citizen and you are so much aware about what is happening at the forefront, especially you have been an advocate of green technologies and sustainability to as a broader thing, you are also advocating for peace. So considering this, I would like to understand from you that what kind of best practices have you seen happening when it comes to the collaboration between developed and developing countries? That is something that can be shared with our audiences.
We need a combination of competition and collaboration. Because competition in business is good. When, for example, a Chinese company BYD this year becomes the biggest producer of electric cars in the world, is passing Tesla, it puts an enormous pressure on American and European car companies to do a lot better, because they're far behind the Chinese, and they understand it, and that competition is good because it will drive new development. But you also need to collaborate, to exchange technologies, to learn from best practice. If some nation have done something spectacularly successful, others can learn from it. One area where Norway can learn a lot from India is in the readiness to protect nature. There was just an elephant in India which was replaced in a national park. That elephant had killed 7 human beings. Still, the attitude in India was, let's save that elephant and put it into a tiger reserve so that it can survive. Well, in my nation, Norway, last day we had a walrus at a beach. It killed no one. It attacked no one. Still, at the end, the government killed that walrus because it could potentially be dangerous to humans in the future. India also has been very successful now in increasing the number of tigers. Both India and Nepal has doubled the number of tigers. Well, that's one of the most difficult of all animals to protect, because tigers attack humans to eat us, and that's very, very rare in nature. So this readiness for India to even protect tigers and even a killer elephant, I think that speaks so loudly about the readiness of Indians to put nature high on the agenda. And Norway and Europe should for sure learn from that. But there are many, many, many other areas where we can exchange views and learn from each other. So let's go for a future which is a combination of business competition with drive, technology, and change with this collaboration.
Would you like to state any examples where some, exchange of knowledge or some kind of technology transfer or anything that best practices were deployed from? Because I know that any deployment would require a lot of contextualization as well. But then if there is any good example that you would love to share?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, 10 years ago, solar energy was 10 times more expensive than it is now. How did that change? Fantastic reduction in the price of solar happen? Well, it happened because of this combination of competition between different companies in doing better, but also in the exchange of technology. In the early days, probably Germany and California were leaders on solar energy. Now China far surpassed both California and Germany, and India in the next couple of years will be the second most important solar power in the world. Yes, some of this is new ideas as to how to improve the efficiency of solar panels, but a lot is also about price. Because if you want to make solar a staple energy in the world, it cannot be expensive. So bringing down the price has been the really ability of particularly China and India, and that serves the world so well.
And this is very interesting, because it is also bringing the discussion back to the first point that I made. The critics have also questioned the whole narrative on the technology side, that the focus on solving this whole sustainability paradigm using technology and innovation is also not fair, because it shifts the focus from the world order and from the systemic changes that can lead to a more just society, a more equitable society. And the actors, I mean, whether you're a developing nation or a developed nation, or the kind of market priorities and the market forces, the supply demand, all of these things are not addressed enough if we just put the entire focus on technology and innovation alone. So, how would you respond to a criticism like that?
It's of course completely unfair to blame any developing nation for climate change. Look, American emissions up to this point in history are 25 times Indian emissions per capita, and about 10 times Chinese emissions per capita. So blaming India for climate change is complete nonsense, and should just people do that, they should get a rotten tomato back right at the nose, because this is complete Western arrogance. However, of course, technology is a very important part of the change, and that's why we need to make sure that everyone has access to the best technology. But if you in the morning, when you get out of your bed, if you turn on the light, or maybe you go and have a hot shower, you will normally not give a lot of thought to how was that energy produced. If that's switched from coal into solar, you have the same hot shower, you have the same lighting of your apartment in the early morning, because every consumer in the world will get exactly the same, but to just get it in a new and environment-friendly way. That can happen in Mumbai or Los Angeles, it can happen in Chennai or in New York. It's exactly the same. And we simply need to move into these technologies. If we don't do that, we will always fail. There is no way you can tell a Norwegian, oh, you need to freeze in the winter. We cannot turn on the heat for you. And very frankly, everyone in Delhi who can afford an air conditioning apparatus will desire that in April or May when it's 50 degrees outside. It's very, very hard to sustain a decent living without air conditioning. So let's take it for granted that everyone in cold weather will want heating, everyone in extreme hot weather would want air conditioning, just that we need to make sure that both heating and air conditioning is happening based on solar and wind and hydropower and all the renewable energies which we can develop everywhere in the world.
Yeah, so we are talking about the decarbonization paradigm, so just electrify everything and then decarbonize your electricity. That is the best solution that way. However, the question that I was trying to put forward was about how could we rethink our economic systems, the whole consumption patterns. Is there a way that we can shift the paradigm there itself, instead of putting the entire onus on technology, innovation, and trying to come up with new ways to address that? And I'm saying that while personally being a huge proponent of technology and innovation, and as I said, we have invested a lot in doing that, but then there is enough dialogue happening on these systemic changes that are required. So how would you reflect on that?
No one knows what the future will bring. Maybe 100 years into the future, we will have a completely different economic system. But today, capitalism is dominant everywhere in the world. And we won't have time to develop a completely new economic system before we solve the environment challenges. I mean, go back to history, there was feudalism, there was slave economy, and of course there was the Stone Age tribal economy. So we have had different economies in the past, we may get a new one in the future, but in this era, capitalism is dominant everywhere in the world. But I think there are two main changes we need to consider. One is, of course, that capitalism is not one system. Capitalism without a proper strong state doesn't work. And that's, of course, why India is moving so much faster than, say, many African countries. It has a well-led state with resources to set the direction, to regulate markets, to provide the rules. So you need a mixture of state and private business, where you have a state which can set the direction, as Prime Minister Modi is doing, but also like many leaders of Indian states are doing, like, well, Chief Minister Stalin in Tamil Nadu, just to give one example. And the other is that we need to move into a circular economy, but that of course can happen within capitalism, because the circular economy is creating jobs, it's creating prosperity, it even create value for shareholders, just that we stop whenever we need something new to go out and mining in nature, but we start circulating everything. If you have 1 kilo of electric waste, like my phone here or your computer, there's more gold in 1 kilo electric waste than there is in 1 kilo of a gold ore out in nature. So throwing away electronics whenever we need something new, it's an enormous waste of resources. Why don't we reuse it in new forms? Same with clothing, 99% of all clothes which are made on planet Earth are just thrown away. Why don't we recycle the cotton or the viscose in the clothes into new products? And it can go on and go on, but of course a circular economy is completely compatible with capitalism. Just you will need the state to set the rules and give direction so that it works in a better, and this is even more efficient, providing more jobs, not fewer jobs. And added, we can also move a lot more into a sharing economy. Do we need every family their own car, or in America, every family 2 or 3 cars? Can't we share cars much more often? We do bike sharing. Maybe we can also do renting of clothes. I mean, you want a blue dress for the party in May, but you may want a red one in June. Maybe you can go and rent the clothing. So we need to be a lot more innovative in how we run capitalism, and we must run it with a proper state, and we must do it in a circular fashion.
That's very interesting. And circular fashion also ensures that it is sustainable and it will continue to, serve the needs. And capitalism is not entirely bad because it creates that kind of fuel that is required to run a system in a very interesting manner. So I'm not going to put in my personal opinions here, but given the current situation, which is
if I may just interrupt you here, look, when India became independent in 1948, life expectancy in India was 30 years. That was the old style of life people had. Only with the power of science and the power of capitalism, India is now at a life expectancy on 70. And frankly, a lot of this happened also after Manmohan Singh made economic reforms in India in the 1990s, opening up the market and giving room for private business like Adani or Tata and all these groups. So we should be aware that capitalism has brought us enormous progress on life expectancy, education, health, food, in every other way, but it's also causing problems which we need to resolve. But without capitalism, without opening up the markets, India will still have been a very poor place.
I totally agree. And especially I was reading this book written by Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan recently. That was about the boom of IT industry and how it has transformed the way and how it has opened the doors for so many newer opportunities and has also, navigated its way through the complex political and geopolitical systems existing at those times. So coming to that global economic slowdown that I was going to mention, so this is a very difficult time, and prior to this, I think around 2008, people had seen economic recession, and again, now that we are hearing almost every day that companies are laying off their employees, and there is a impending slowdown that is expected at a global level, and the cost of living crisis is also impending. So there are all of these factors, I would say externalities, coupled with climate change. It is posing a huge threat on the current system. So, how do you think that, uh, in the current geopolitical scenario, and here I'm also mentioning the kind of things like the Ukraine war and the resulting effects, the ripple effects that it has caused on the markets and the supply chains worldwide. How do you think the climate change dialogue, which is so urgent, going to cope up with these different geopolitical tensions and make its way so that people are able to prioritize? When I say people, it is nations, businesses, and communities, so that they can prioritize climate action above all of these tensions. And I mean, believing that this is not going to wait for these things to settle. Like, I wish we had that kind of luxury to say that, yeah, we can address climate change after we have already sorted this global economic slowdown, or after we have already sorted the Ukraine crisis. But we do not have that kind of luxury. So, how do you think we can prioritize and put that high on agenda in the current situation?
By seeing this as an opportunity rather than a problem. And interestingly enough, the two most powerful leaders of developing nations, President Xi Jinping of China and Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, they see it exactly as an opportunity to provide more jobs, more prosperity by going green, moving from fossil fuels into solar, creating an enormous amount of jobs in India, and of course prosperity, because you need electric power to run your homes or factories. So we need to get out of this old thinking that going green is a cost. It's an enormous opportunity. And bad and horrible as the war in Ukraine is, it will supercharge the green development of the world. Because in Europe, everyone wants to be independent of Russian oil. How can we be independent of Russian oil? Only way is to develop solar and wind and hydro, which are domestic energy forms. I mean, the sun is German, the wind is French, and of course it's Indian and Chinese and everywhere else, but it's there, and it can be harvested, and you're not depending on anyone else. Well, India, China, Brazil, they are not so concerned with being dependent on Russia, but they're very concerned with the volatile prices on fossil fuels. Take India as an example. Every drop of oil India uses and consumes is basically imported from somewhere. From Russia, from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, maybe from Norway. It's imported from somewhere. Which means that whenever India can replace oil imported from somewhere else with solar or wind or hydropower in India itself, it's good for the economy, it's good for ecology, but it even saves money, which can be used for health and education on Indian budgets, because you don't send the money out of the country. It remains in India to provide better for the people of India. So these are complete win-wins if we move from the old fossil fuel economy into a new renewable energy economy. And that's, of course, also obviously why Prime Minister Modi is so determined for this to happen.
So, what kind of, in the context of the trade agreements, how do you think that the developed nations are currently supporting the economic priorities as well as the sustainable development happening in the developing nations? Especially when you talk about the imports like oil and other related amenities that are extremely critical for a developing economy like India.
Those developing nations which are moving fast forward, China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, many other Asian nations can be named, and some African. Those are moving very fast because they have the attitude that we can capture opportunities. We can win, we have the abilities, we have the strength of our people, and we can be strong in this new economy. Some developing nations, unfortunately, spend most of the time asking for handouts from the rich. This is a fair demand. Nothing wrong with the demand, except that it won't happen, and it won't bring the development. So that's why I'm so big fan of both Prime Minister Modi and many other leaders of Asian developing nations, because to take this attitude, let's do it. Let's capture the markets. Let's go ahead, and not waiting for someone else to solve the problems, because unfortunately that will not happen. And frankly, if Japan or South Korea in the 1950s was much, much poorer than basically any nation in Africa. Now South Korea is one of the richest nations in the entire world. Singapore in the 1950s was also poorer than Africa. Now it's the absolute top on the world. It didn't come from nothing to the top of the world by handouts from someone else, but by hard and smart work. And now increasingly these nations also going green. Singapore is one of the greenest cities in the entire world.
So how do you think in this scenario the private sector is rising up to the occasion and I know it is playing a huge role, and as I said, the entire rise of IT industry is a huge telltale of success and how it has transformed the economies. Similarly, like if we were to coin, say, green era as one of the boom, like IT boom of the past, how do you think the private sector is contributing to that at the moment, as you see the global environment, as well as the opportunities that do exist? And this would be more like a motivation or incentive for them to rise up to the occasion if they are not.
No, I mean, absolutely. I think in most parts of the world now, business, private sector is ahead of politics. They're not hiding behind. When President Trump said that United States will go out of the Paris Agreement, not one big company in the United States said, "Oh, thank you, Mr. President. That was a great act." They all said, "Mr. President, we happen to disagree with you. We believe climate change is real. We believe we need to protect nature better. And my company, being it Google or Amazon or Apple, we will act on that, even if the president has a different opinion." And all over the world, you see business now take the lead. In India, there is a combination of a strong political drive in the green direction, but also a strong business drive. And yes, some of these companies has made their money from coal or from oil and gas in the past. I mean, both Ambani and Adani made a lot of profits from that, but they are now rapidly going green, rapidly investing in massive scale in the new green economy, which is so good to see. And of course, added to that, there is a huge number of smaller Indian companies coming up, Acme, Renew, just to mention a few in this space, but many others. So you have the combinations of these big captains of Tata, Adani, or Reliance, with a forest of many smaller trees, which will go into the green future.
And where do you see the role of these public-private partnerships that can be leveraged to advance the sustainable development goals? And most of it is happening, but then not at the scale and speed at which we would anticipate that to happen, given the urgency on climate action.
You need governments to regulate markets, to set the rules for how the market can go in a green direction. I mean, for example, making it easier and better to get loans or finance for green products than for those who destroy nature. You need governments to kind of give the vision for the nation, which where we want to go. And in some cases, also government can provide economic incentives, guarantees, loans, even subsidies for going green. When Prime Minister Modi more and more is launching these what they call the missions, that's a way of using the state in a very creative way to drive a green economy. Very much like South Korea did it in the past, and that led to companies like Samsung and Hyundai. Look, South Korea, a relatively small, somewhat insular nation where everyone speaks Korean. No one else in the world can understand Korean. Some of those fantastic companies in the entire world, like Samsung. And that's happened because of this strong push from the government to drive private sector development. So I'm a very firm believer in a strong state regulating markets and setting the direction, but leaving it to private sector to do the innovations, development, and do it at a scale which matters.
So since you are a huge advocate of the governance and the role of the state in making most of these things happen, including the role of private players and the businesses and the public-private partnerships, so if the governance has to be looked at as it is today, what all things would you highlight as the most positive attributes, and what do you think can be improved as a emerging economy that is set out to be a $5 trillion economy in a couple of years?
If we look to the problems India are facing, I think it's still quite a lot of red tape. If you're an investor, whether Indian or foreigner, you go to an Indian state and want to invest in something, you can easily be sent around to 20 different ministries and need a clearance or a permission from somewhere. And of course, it takes a lot of time and make it very slow. Yeah. Added, unfortunately, of course, in some cases, this is also due to corruption. You may ask, why is India so dominant in the IT industry in the world, but still not in the same way in production of goods. I mean, on manufacturing, China is far ahead of India, while on Infosys and all these companies, India has done very well. Well, one reason may be that to start these businesses, you could just do it. You could start Infosys in your own flat and take it to a big scale, while to get permissions for manufacturing, you will need a lot of permits from governments, and in some cases maybe even have to pay for this to corrupt officials. So if you look to the weaknesses, it's, I think, corruption and too extensive bureaucracies are the key factors which need to be overcome. When it comes to the positives, they are enormous. I mean, it has a very, very young, highly educated, I mean, still, of course, many more Indians should be educated, but they have a highly dynamic, educated group of young people. It has, in my view, brilliant leadership from the center by Prime Minister Modi, and in many states also, who really want to overcome the red tape and want to overcome corruption. And it has the enormous advantage of being one market. You produce something in Tamil Nadu, well, you can sell it in Kashmir, or you can sell it in Uttarakhand. It's one market. Africa is 54 nations, every nation basically one market. You cannot produce something in one country and sell it to the other country, which of course creates an enormous disadvantage for Africa, and same in Latin America, compared to India being one market of 1.4 billion people, which gives so enormous opportunities. And India today expected to have the highest growth of any nation of any major nation this year. And I just saw statistics about the chance of economic recession, and India came on top of that list, meaning there was zero chance of economic recession in India, while it was a quite high chance of recession in a number of other nations.
Fantastic. No, that's very well said, and we are definitely, I mean, going to be one of the largest markets that any business could enter into. And that's the reason many of the manufacturing hubs are also looking at India now, after actually being disappointed from other countries that they were operating in so far. And that is a good sign, because India is trying to open up doors in this direction. And probably there is some understanding on this front that there has to be more ease of business for such entities, so that more production and manufacturing. So there's an entire drive on Make in India, as you must be already aware, and we are, I mean, positioned to look at the entire semiconductor market also, as it is set up in Gujarat. So there is a lot of impetus from the government on these areas. However, when it comes to the public-private partnerships and that collaboration that can really kind of fuel the innovation ecosystem or the startups the way they should be thriving, because still there is a lot of gap when it comes to an idea, when it germinates till the time it sees the light of the day. So how can we somewhere shorten that gap and address the challenges that are faced by that ecosystem through addressing the public-private partnerships, without really leaning on the investment support or FDIs from other countries?
Well, I mean, I was, as you may know, I'm advisor to the government of Tamil Nadu, and they have asked exactly the same questions. And my strong advice is that they need to make a kind of one-stop shop. There must be one overriding office where foreign investors, but also Indian investors can connect and get all the clearances. And then that office will connect with everyone else, because there's no way any investor can run around to 15 different ministries and speak to all of them, and they get the clearance, and when you've gone around to all the 15, you have to start again because something has come up. So making this, streamlining this, of course, there need to be, if you want to set up a factory, there need to be a proper assessment of the environment consequences, or there need to be a proper dialogue with the local people around that factory, for sure. But all these need to happen in parallel, so we don't lose time, and it can move fast. And as part of this, of course, government contribution, where the government give a subsidy or guarantee for the risk of the private investor, or pay part of the bill, or allot land, I mean, there are lots of ways the government can help private business going green, but it can only happen with a kind of very close dialogue between business and government. But it cannot be an endless number of different entities providing red tape.
Right. And here, do you see there is enormous opportunity for the world also to look at? Like we have been closely in touch with the Global Innovation Hub of the United Nations, and we had some wonderful conversations around identifying the problem statements, just getting the right problem statements out there in the market. And that's why the program that we have developed, it is focused on, first of all, sourcing the problems from the corporates as well as the states, and then defining them in the most appropriate manner, and then reaching out again to the solution providers and calling for solutions, and then doing the matchmaking. And that happens with the best of experts and minds sitting, doing this matchmaking process and mentoring these startups that are then matched, and then taking them to the entire journey of and these are mostly ideas and solutions that are already in the growth stage and require very targeted support on taking them to the next level. So here, considering that there is enough amount of opportunity existing when it comes to markets, as well as the young innovators. So how is the world looking at India as an innovation hub?
I think there is a lot of positive expectations to India now. Because people see political stability and they see business coming up and they see the high growth rate. I think when I speak to foreign investors, they're mainly worried with the two issues I mentioned, corruption and red tape. So to overcome this is critical to the future growth of India. Of course, corruption can never come to zero. There's corruption in any nation in the world, and red tape also exists everywhere. So these are not separate Indian issues, but then we need to fight them very hard. In Denmark, which is a small, easy nation to work with, Mats Nipper, who's the CEO of Ørsted, one of the 3 or 4 biggest wind makers in the world, he told me even in Denmark it takes a lot longer to get the permission to construct an offshore windmill than to actually do it. Setting it up, the technology is available, business is ready to do it, but still it's a very, very slow process to get the permissions. So on these matters, of course, you need the political leadership from the center and the state, but you also need people like yourself and BuzzOnEarth who can help businesses, help the many small enterprises out there to get it right, to get it fast, and of course to get it green.
Great. Yeah, we are at it, and I hope we are able to build that ecosystem to accelerate this whole process, and that's why we're calling it Accelerator for Climate Entrepreneurship. And idea is to ensure that we are seen as a global innovation hub, and where things do happen at a much faster pace, and there is less of hurdles and more of possibilities that can be seen across the whole gamut of green technologies and solutions. And not only from the technology standpoint, we're also looking at the market solutions that can ease the development and deployment and accessibility of an idea by the larger masses. So that is what we are at it, and we need more and more support for us to be successful in making this happen. Now, coming to some questions from your end, or some reflections from your end based on your, relationship with India and other developing nations. What do you see as some of the most important highlights that do need to be mentioned when it comes to urgent climate action needed at a global level?
I think I was really inspired by what Prime Minister Modi recently said, that we need to take the climate conversation from the conference table to the dinner table. I think that is exactly right, because sometimes we environmentalists speak at big conferences and speak with each other, and it's mainly young people and mainly intellectuals and maybe
tagline is mainstreaming sustainability, if you notice.
Yeah, exactly.
From the conference table to the dinner table.
Make it a people's movement. Speak about the environment in such a way that any farmer in Uttar Pradesh, any coal worker in Jharkhand can understand what you're talking about, making it a people's movement, not just for young, urban, middle-class people, but for every citizen, because protecting nature and creating more and better jobs, these are issues at the heart of every Indian and people all over the world. Also tend to believe that India has a historical tradition which is even more environment friendly than most other places. Look, the old Indians, they really venerated nature. They made God half animal, half human. Ganesh, half elephant, half human. Hanuman, half monkey, half human. They put the cow up as a great symbol of life, of earth, of our future, and said we should consider the cow as our mother. But this is making an ideology where environment and nature is front and center. Maybe even more than in Christianity or Islam or other faith systems. Everywhere environment is present, but probably no other place as important as in the thinking of the old Indians.
That's right. And the sustainability and the whole notion of coexistence is very deep rooted in the tradition and the culture here. So definitely that must surface and reflect in the kind of innovations and solutions that are brought forward by the country. So great. I'm done with my questions. And if you have any other reflections that you would like to talk about.
I'm very fine. Thank you so much. And I will just like to thank you for all the great work you are doing. You are doing fantastic work for India, for Karnataka, for the world. So please keep up your good work, and I will do whatever I can to support your great work.
Thank you so much. It really means a lot. And thank you for all the work that you are doing, especially from the kind of advocacy. I remember meeting you at Sri Sri's ashram the other day, and the whole notion on, bringing peace to the world. I was very touched with that because everyone is vested in looking at their own, interests. And here there is an entire lobby focused on bringing world peace. So that is really very motivating, and the work that you are doing at the global level, that's very, very supporting the countries like India and other developing economies that can gain from this kind of intervention that you are promoting. Thank you so much for all of this, and thank you so much for being on our show today. I think our audiences would really, really enjoy listening to your views and would be inspired to take on the climate action on the most urgent basis. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.
Yep.